The vast expanse of space stretched before Captain Elias Reyes, a sea of stars shimmering like scattered diamonds across an infinite black canvas. His ship, the Orion's Blade, glided silently through the void, its hull reflecting the distant light of a billion suns. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of the ship's systems and the steady beeping of various monitors. Reyes stood at the helm, his thoughts heavy with the weight of the mission ahead. They had been traveling for days, navigating through uncharted regions of space, chasing a relic lost to history, an ancient object rumored to hold unimaginable power. The Zelker, a race of enigmatic and technologically advanced beings, had come to the Human Alliance months ago with news of this relic. According to their legends, it was a key to a long-forgotten war, a conflict so destructive that it had left entire star systems in ruin. The relic had been buried deep beneath the surface of Mars, hidden away for millennia, but now, something had changed. The relic had stirred. Captain Reyes, Commander Sarah Hawthorne's voice broke through the quiet tension on the bridge. "We've reached Mars. Scans are picking up unusual seismic activity across the surface. It looks like the planet's core is destabilizing." Reyes nodded, his brow furrowing as he stared at the holographic display of Mars spinning slowly before them. "Any sign of the relic?" Hawthorne hesitated for a moment, her fingers dancing across the console. "Not yet, sir. The signals are faint, but they're there. It's deep below the surface, exactly where the Zelker said it would be." Reyes turned away from the display and glanced at the alien standing quietly at the edge of the bridge. Tazir, the Zelker envoy, stood tall and silent, his silvered skin shimmering under the dim lights of the ship. His large, black eyes met Reyes, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. "This is what you feared, isn't it?" Reyes asked, his voice low. Tazir nodded, his voice resonating with a deep, almost musical tone. "The relic is not just a device, Captain. It is a living thing. It was never meant to be disturbed. If it awakens, the consequences will be beyond what any of us can imagine." Reyes took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We don't have a choice. If the relic poses a threat, we need to find it and neutralize it." The bridge lights flickered as the Orion's Blade descended through the thin Martian atmosphere. Outside the windows, the planet's reddish surface came into view, scarred by deep valleys and jagged mountains. Reyes watched as they approached the coordinates given by the Zelker, a barren desert of cracked, rust-colored earth stretching endlessly into the horizon. "Prepare the landing crew," Reyes ordered. "Sarah, you're with me. Tazir, I hope you're ready." The landing craft touched down with a jolt, sending up a cloud of dust and debris as it settled onto the Martian surface. Reyes stepped out, his boots crunching against the hard ground. The air was thin, almost suffocating, and the sky overhead was a sickly yellow, the result of dust storms that never seemed to end. Around them, the landscape was desolate, devoid of life. It felt like standing in the graveyard of an ancient civilization, one that had long since faded into the annals of time. "Captain, over here." Sarah's voice called out through the comms. Reyes hurried over to where she stood, her attention focused on a large fissure in the ground. The earth around it was unstable, crumbling at the edges. And yet, there, deep within the chasm, something glowed faintly, an eerie, pulsating light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. "That's it," Tazir said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "The relic." Reyes stared down into the abyss, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a long way down, and there was no telling what awaited them. But he knew they had no choice. "All right," Reyes said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." The descent into the fissure was slow and treacherous, the narrow passage barely wide enough to accommodate their gear. As they climbed deeper into the Martian underworld, the air grew colder, the walls of the chasm closing in around them. And yet, the light from the relic grew stronger, its strange, otherworldly glow casting eerie shadows along the walls. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the bottom. Reyes' boots hit solid ground, and he glanced around. The cavern they had entered was massive, larger than anything he had expected. The walls were lined with strange, alien symbols, etched into the stone with a precision that was almost impossible to comprehend. In the center of the chamber stood the relic. It was a towering monolith, its surface covered in intricate glyphs that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The light emanating from it was blinding, and the air around it hummed with energy. Reyes could feel it, a deep, thrumming vibration that resonated in his bones. "What is this thing?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Reyes could answer, Tazir stepped forward, his expression grim. "It is a weapon," he said quietly. "A weapon of unimaginable power. It was created by the ancients, an empire that ruled this galaxy long before either of our races existed. They used it to wage war against an enemy so terrible that they were willing to destroy entire worlds to stop them." Reyes stared at the relic, his mind racing. "And now it's waking up," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Tazir nodded. "Yes. And if it fully awakens, it will bring destruction on a scale that none of us can comprehend." Reyes took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "All right. How do we stop it?" Tazir hesitated, his eyes flicking to the relic. "There may be a way," he said slowly. "But it is risky. The relic's energy core is buried deep within its structure. If we can disrupt that core, we may be able to shut it down before it fully activates." Reyes nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "How do we get to the core?" Tazir pointed to a narrow passageway at the far end of the chamber. "That tunnel leads to the heart of the relic. But be warned, Captain, once we enter, there may be no turning back. The relic will sense our presence, and it will defend itself." Reyes glanced at Sarah, who gave him a nod of grim determination. "We don't have a choice," she said. "We have to try." With a deep breath, Reyes led the way into the passage, the glow of the relic fading behind them as they descended deeper into the labyrinthine structure. The walls around them pulsed with an eerie light, the symbols shifting and changing with every step. It felt as though the relic was alive, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they approached the core, the air grew thick with energy, and Reyes could feel the hair on his arms standing on end. The chamber before them was vast, dominated by a massive sphere of crackling energy that floated in the center of the room. This was the heart of the relic, the source of its power. Reyes stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. "How do we shut it down?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the energy field. Tazir stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for a small, ancient device strapped to his belt. "This is a key," he said quietly. "It was given to me by my people. It can disrupt the relic's energy core, but it will take time." Reyes nodded. "Do it." As Tazir moved to insert the key into a small slot near the base of the sphere, the chamber suddenly shook violently. The walls around them began to crack, and the symbols on the floor glowed with a blinding intensity. "It's waking up!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with panic. Reyes drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. But there was nothing, only the overwhelming sense of dread that filled the air. Tazir worked frantically, his fingers moving with a speed born of desperation. "I need more time," he shouted, his voice strained. But time was running out. From the shadows of the chamber, figures began to emerge, creatures unlike anything Reyes had ever seen. They were tall and thin, their bodies composed of a shimmering, metallic substance. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their movements were unnervingly fast. "Get ready!" Reyes shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. The creatures moved as one, their movements fluid and terrifying. Reyes fired his weapon, the blast of energy striking one of the creatures in the chest. But instead of falling, the creature absorbed the energy, its body glowing brighter. "They're feeding off the energy from the relic." Sarah shouted, her voice filled with fear. Reyes cursed under his breath. This was going to be harder than he thought. As the creatures closed in, Reyes fought with everything he had. But no matter how many times he fired, the creatures kept coming, their bodies glowing brighter with each hit. "We can't stop them," Sarah shouted, her voice desperate. Reyes glanced at Tazir, who was still working frantically to shut down the relic. "How much longer?" he shouted, his voice strained. Tazir didn't answer, his focus entirely on the task at hand. Reyes gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They couldn't hold out much longer. The creatures were closing in, their glowing eyes filled with a hunger that chilled Reyes to the bone. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, there was a blinding flash of light. The creatures froze in place, their bodies trembling as the light from the relic began to fade. The hum of energy that had filled the air suddenly went silent, and the chamber was plunged into darkness. Tazir collapsed to the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. "It's done," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Reyes let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They had done it. The relic was shut down. But as he stared at the now dark chamber around them, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had stopped the relic for now, but the damage had been done. The relic had awakened, and the galaxy had felt its power. The war that had been forgotten for millennia was about to begin again. And this time, there would be no stopping it.